Hello, welcome back. It's good to have you here again this week as we continue the book by Philip Yancey, The Bible That Jesus Read. Link to buy the book is down in the description below if you're interested. We're in chapter 5 about the book of Ecclesiastes, and this section is called Eternity in Our Hearts. I once came across a scene of beauty just a few miles outside of Anchorage, Alaska, where I noticed a number of cars pulled off the highway. Against the slate gray sky, the water of an ocean inlet had a slight greenish cast, interrupted by small whitecaps. Soon I saw these were not whitecaps at all, but whales, silvery white beluga whales in a pod feeding no more than 50 feet offshore. I stood with the other onlookers for 40 minutes, listening to the rhythmic motion of the sea, following the graceful, ghostly crescents of surfacing whales. The crowd was hushed, even reverent. For just that moment, nothing else, dinner reservations, the trip schedule, life back home, mattered. We were confronted with a scene of quiet beauty and a majesty of scale. We felt small. We strangers stood together in silence until the whales moved further out. Then we climbed the banks together and got in our cars to resume our busy, ordered lives that suddenly seemed less urgent. The teacher would doubtless understand the crowd's response to the whales, for he insists that though we are not gods, we are not solely human or animals either. God has also set eternity in the hearts of men. Such an an elegant phrase applies to too much in human experience. Surely it hints at a religious instinct, an instinct that, to the bafflement of anthropologists, finds expression in every human society ever studied. Our hearts perceive eternity in ways other than religious as well. The teacher is no nihilist. He sees with dazzling clarity the beauty in the created world. I detect in Ecclesiastes a sense of longing, that C.S. Lewis wrote about so eloquently. Drippings of grace, Lewis called them once. And those rumors of transcendence that he experienced when listening to music, reading Greek myths, or visiting a cathedral. We all feel the longing sometimes in sex, beauty, music, nature, love. Where did our sense of beauty and pleasure come from? That seems to be a huge question, a philosophical equivalent for atheists to the problem of pain for Christians. And the teacher's answer is clear. A good and loving God naturally would want his creatures to experience delight, joy, and personal fulfillment. G.K. Chesterton credits pleasure or eternity in his heart as a signpost that eventually directed him to God. In his book Orthodoxy, he wrote, "There had come into my mind a vague and vast impression that in some way all good was a remnant to be stored and held sacred out of some primordial ruin. Man had saved his good as Robinson Crusoe saved his goods. He had saved them from a wreck. All this I felt, and the age gave me no encouragement to feel it. And all this time I had not even thought of Christian theology." An encounter with beauty or an experience of intense joy may cause us for a time to forget our true mortal state, but not for long. And the child we held in our lap at dinner time, we scream at near bedtime. The person we made love to last night, we feud with today. Every bride walks the aisle believing in a new life of bliss, and every parent of a newborn leaves the hospital full of joy. And yet we know that half of all marriages end in divorce, and perhaps a third of all children will suffer abuse at their parents' hands. We cannot shed ever the unbearable burden of the gods. A person may, of course, sense eternity in the heart and never turn to God who placed it there. For those who continue to live under the sun, the teacher of Ecclesiastes has a simple message. You will surely fail to find what satisfies. Is this all there is? Asked singer Peggy Lee in her own 60s version of Ecclesiastes. You may fail on the positive side by frantically chasing wealth, success, and gourmet sex, or you may fail on the negative side by dropping out, giving up, and sinking into a chemical stupor. In his Odyssey, the teacher fell both ways. The account of decadence by the richest, wisest, and most talented person in the world serves as a perfect allegory for what can happen when we lose sight of the giver whose good gifts we enjoy. And pleasure represents a great good, but also a grave danger. If we start chasing pleasure as an end to itself, along the way we may lose sight of the one who gave us such good gifts as sexual drive, taste buds, and the capacity to appreciate beauty. In that event, as Ecclesiastes tells it, a wholesale devotion to despair will paradoxically lead to a state of utter despair. Ecclesiastes insists that the stones we tripped over are good things in themselves. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Yet by assuming a burden we were not meant to carry, we turn to nudity and pornography, wine into alcoholism, food into gluttony, and human diversity into racism and prejudice. Despair descends as we abuse God's good gifts, and they seem no longer gifts and no longer good. Ecclesiastes endures as a work of great literature and a book of great truth because it presents both sides of life on this planet. The promise of pleasures so alluring that we may devote our lives to their pursuit, and then the haunting realization that those pleasures ultimately do not satisfy. God's tantalizing world is too big for us, made for another home, made for eternity. We finally realize that nothing this side of timeless paradise will quiet the rumors of discontent. The teacher completes his sentence. He has also set eternity in the hearts of men. Yet, they cannot fathom what God has done from the beginning to end. And that's the point of Ecclesiastes in a nutshell. The same lesson Job learned in Dust and Ashes, that we humans cannot figure out life on our own. And the teacher learns in A Robe and Palace. In the end, the teacher freely admits that life does not make sense outside of God and will never fully make sense because we are not God. As Kierkegaard remarked, if a man's life is not to be dozed away in inactivity or wasted in bustling movement, there must be something higher which draws it. In the teacher's words in 11:5, as you do not know the path of the wind or how the body is formed in a mother's womb, so you cannot understand the work of God, the maker of all things. Unless we acknowledge our limits and subject ourselves to God's rule, unless we trust the giver of all good gifts, we will end up in a state of despair. Ecclesiastes calls us to accept our status as creatures under the dominion of the Creator. Something few of us do without a struggle. And that's where we're going to end for today. And we'll catch you again next week as we continue reading the Bible that Jesus read by Philip Yancey.